I never thought buying my dream home would turn into a living nightmare. But there I was, standing on my own front porch, face to face with a woman who acted like she owned the entire neighborhood. She had the haircut, the attitude, and the smug expression of someone who had never heard the word no. And the moment I told her to get off my property, she did something I never expected. She slapped me. Hard. She didn't care that it was my land, my home. No, in her world. Everything belonged to the HOA. And she would do anything, lie, cheat, even call the cops on me, just to make me bend to her ridiculous rules. Love seeing entitled people get what they deserve. Subscribe for more crazy stories like this. When I bought this house, I knew exactly what I wanted: peace, privacy, and zero HOA nonsense. I wasn't about to let some overreaching neighborhood dictatorship tell me what color I could paint my house or how many inches tall my grass had to be. I had spent months searching for the perfect home, something secluded, something mine, and I found it. The house was a bit of a fixer-upper, but I didn't mind. The land surrounding it was beautiful, wide open space, a perfect escape from nosy neighbors. Or so I thought. That illusion shattered the moment Karen appeared. It started with little things. I'd come home to find notes taped to my door, warnings about my unapproved paint color, a deep purple I loved, complaints about the gnomes in my yard, and even a demand to remove my chickens. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake. Maybe someone thought I had joined the HOA when I moved in. So, I did what any reasonable person would do. I ignored the notes. Then Karen showed up. It was a Saturday morning, and I had just finished feeding the chickens when I heard the unmistakable sound of high heels clacking up my driveway. I turned to see her standing at the edge of my property, clipboard in hand, wearing an expression like she had just stepped in something disgusting. "You need to repaint your house," she announced, like a queen decreeing a law. I raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" She sighed like she was dealing with a particularly slow child. "Your house color. It's an eyesore. And the gnomes? Completely unacceptable. The HOA has standards." I crossed my arms. "I'm not in the HOA." She gave me a tight, fake smile. "Oh, we're expanding. Your house will be part of the HOA soon enough, so you might as well comply now." I laughed. Actually laughed. That's not how that works. You can't just force someone into an HOA. Her face darkened. "I have bylaws right here." She slapped the clipboard against her palm like it was a weapon. "If you refuse to follow the rules, we'll fine you. And if you don't pay those fines, well..." She tilted her head, voice dripping with fake sympathy. "It would be a shame if you lost your home." I stared at her, incredulous. Was this woman serious? "You need to leave," I said firmly. Karen's expression curdled. She stepped onto my porch, crossing into my personal space like she belonged there. "No," she snapped. "This is HOA property." That was it. I pointed at the street. "Off my property. Now." And that's when she snapped. Her hand flew out so fast, I barely saw it coming. A sharp, stinging pain exploded across my cheek, and for a split second, I was too stunned to react. Then she took a deep breath, changed her entire demeanor in an instant, and screamed, "Help! He's attacking me!" I blinked. "What?" Karen staggered back, clutching her chest like I had just punched her. "Oh my God! Somebody call 911, she wailed. I heard my neighbor's front door swing open. Karen turned toward the street, tears instantly forming in her eyes, voice shaking. "He grabbed me," she sobbed. "He wouldn't let me leave." I felt my stomach drop. This woman wasn't just crazy. She was dangerous. I reached for my phone, already dialing 911, but Karen beat me to it. I could hear her talking to the dispatcher, voice breaking as she painted herself as the helpless victim. She was sobbing, actually sobbing, and she was so convincing that I suddenly felt cold fear creep into my chest. The police were going to believe her, and I was about to have the fight of my life. The moment I heard the distant wail of sirens, My stomach twisted into knots. Karen stood there, still clutching her chest like she was a victim of some great injustice. "Oh, thank God," she gasped as a police car pulled up. I was so scared. The second the officers stepped out, she ran toward them, sobbing like an actress in a soap opera. He attacked me. I told him to stop, but he wouldn't let me leave his property. One of the officers, a broad-shouldered guy with a sharp gaze, glanced from Karen to me. His partner, a younger officer with a cautious expression, kept a hand near his holster. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "She's lying," I said, keeping my voice steady. "She trespassed on my property. I told her to leave, and when she refused, she slapped me. I have it on camera." Karen let out a dramatic gasp. "You have me on camera? Filming me without my consent? That's illegal. Arrest him." The officers exchanged a look. The older one turned to me. "You got footage of this?" "Yes," I said, already unlocking my phone. "I have security cameras installed. The footage will show everything." Karen's expression twitched for just a second, a flicker of panic. "Of course, he has cameras," she said, voice shaking. "He's some kind of pervert. He probably films women all the time. That's why he wouldn't let me leave. He was trying to get me inside his house." That one hit me like a gut punch. She wasn't just lying. She was twisting reality, making herself the helpless victim and painting me as a monster. I clenched my jaw, holding out my phone. Checked the footage. The officers hesitated. The younger one shifted uneasily, like he was starting to doubt Karen's act. The older one, however, had his eyes locked on me, studying my every movement. "We're going to need you to come with us," he said. My heart stopped. "What?" I said, barely believing what I just heard. Karen immediately burst into fresh tears. "Thank you, officer. I was so scared." He tried to. She cut herself off, shoulders shaking. I couldn't believe it. She was winning. "No," I snapped. "You don't understand. Look at the footage. I have proof she's lying. We'll review it at the station," the older officer said. "But right now, we have a report of assault and unlawful detainment." Karen hid her face in her hands, playing the role of the trembling, terrified victim to perfection. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. I was about to be arrested for defending my own damn property. Just then, another voice rang out. "He's telling the truth." We all turned. My next-door neighbor, Mr. Dawson, stood at the edge of my driveway, arms crossed. He was an older man, retired military, no nonsense. "I saw the whole thing," he said. "This lady," he jerked a thumb at Karen, "trespassed onto his property, refused to leave, then smacked him when he stood his ground. After that, she started screaming like a damn banshee, making up lies the second she saw you guys coming." Karen's face turned a deep shade of red. "That's not true," she snapped. "This has nothing to do with you, you old." Mr. Dawson pulled out his phone. "I got my own cameras, sweetheart." Karen froze. The officers exchanged another look. The younger one stepped forward. "Sir, can we review the footage?" "With pleasure." Karen's entire body went stiff. She turned to the officers, her hands wringing together in fake desperation. I think maybe I misremembered some details. I was just so frightened, and—" "Save it." The older officer cut her off. He turned back to me. "Sir, let's see that footage." With shaking hands, I played the security cam footage on my phone. It showed everything: Karen trespassing, me telling her to leave, her slapping me, and then her fake meltdown. The younger officer exhaled sharply. "Well, damn," he muttered. Karen's entire demeanor changed in an instant. You can't arrest me," she shrieked. "I was just doing my duty as the HOA president. He's breaking the rules. His house, his yard. He's ruining the neighborhood." The older officer sighed. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for filing a false police report and assault. Karen's face twisted in horror. No, you can't do this. I have rights. I'm in charge here. She tried to pull away, but the officers had her in cuffs before she could take another step. As they led her to the squad car, she continued shrieking, I'll have your jobs for this. The HOA will hear about this. You can't do this to me. I let out a long breath, my head still spinning. Mr. Dawson clapped a hand on my shoulder. Looks like you got yourself a real nutcase for a neighbor. I gave him a weary smile. Yeah, but at least she's not my problem anymore. Or so I thought. Because if there was one thing I should have known, it was that Karen wasn't done with me yet. I should have known it wouldn't be that easy. For a few days, things were peaceful. Karen was hauled off in cuffs, and I figured that was the end of it. Maybe she'd get a fine, maybe a slap on the wrist, but at least she wouldn't be screaming on my porch again. But then, I got a letter in the mail. The official-looking envelope had HOA Board of Directors printed on the front in bold letters. I almost laughed. Was this some kind of sick joke? But the moment I opened it, my blood ran cold. It was a violation notice. Apparently, my property was now part of the HOA, and I had exactly 30 days to repaint my house, remove all unauthorized structures, aka my chicken coop, and pay an outstanding balance of $5,000 in membership fees and fines. I was fuming. This had to be Karen's doing. I stormed over to the HOA office the next morning, documents in hand, ready for war. The receptionist barely looked up as she shoved a clipboard toward me. Fill this out if you want to dispute a violation. I don't need to dispute anything, I said, slamming my property deed and HOA exemption letter onto the counter. I'm not in the HOA. I never signed up. I have proof. The receptionist frowned and glanced at the papers. Then, her expression shifted slightly, like she knew something wasn't right, but wasn't about to admit it. Wait here, she muttered before disappearing into the back. A few minutes later, the door swung open and a balding man in a cheap suit stepped out. Mr. Carter, he greeted me with a phony smile. I'm Bill, head of the HOA board. How can I help you? You can start by explaining why I'm suddenly getting violation notices when I have legal proof that my property is not part of the HOA. His smile didn't waver. There's been a recent expansion. New bylaws were passed that included. Bullshit. I cut him off. You can't just force someone into an HOA. That's illegal. Bill sighed dramatically, like he was dealing with a particularly dumb child. Listen, I understand your frustration, but these things happen. Now, if you just pay the initial fee and bring your property up to standard, we can... I'm not paying a dime. His fake smile twitched. That's the unfortunate, because failure to comply will result in a lien being placed on your property. I stared at him, barely containing my rage. You think you can just make up rules, bully people into paying, and get away with it. He tilted his head slightly, smirking. It's worked before. I clenched my fists. I'm not like the others. His smirk widened. We'll see. I stormed out, already dialing my lawyer. The court hearing came faster than I expected. I walked in, dressed sharp, documents in hand, ready to tear them apart. Across the room, Karen sat smugly next to Bill, whispering something in his ear. She was out on bail, and somehow still pulling strings. The judge called us forward. Mr. Carter, you claim your property is not part of the HOA. Do you have evidence? I handed over my deed, property survey, and the original HOA exemption letter. The judge scanned through them, then looked at the HOA's side. Mr. Billings, do you have any legally binding documents proving Mr. Carter voluntarily agreed to be part of your association? Bill cleared his throat. We, have recently amended bylaws that... Did he sign anything? Bill hesitated. The judge frowned. So you just forced him in. Karen leaned forward, voice dripping with mock innocence. Your Honor, we're just trying to maintain the integrity of our community. His property value affects ours, and with those modifications he's made. I cut her off. You mean the house color you don't like? The chickens you have no authority over. She gritted her teeth, but the judge was already done. This is clear harassment, the judge said, shaking his head. The HOA has no legal claim over Mr. Carter's property. All violations, fines, and liens are voided. Karen's face drained of color. Bill looked like he was going to pass out. Additionally, the judge continued, it appears Ms. Jennings, Karen, has a history of false accusations and legal trouble. This entire case seems retaliatory. Karen's eyes widened in panic. Mr. Carter, the judge said, you are free to countersue for damages, legal fees, and emotional distress. I turned to Karen, watching as her smug expression crumbled into horror. Oh, I was going to drag her through the mud. She thought she could bully me. She had no idea who she was messing with. Karen wasn't just losing. She was sinking. The judge's words had barely left his mouth before she started unraveling. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, her mind desperately scrambling for a way out. This is absurd, she screeched, shooting up from her seat. He's lying. He forged those documents. He's manipulating the system to avoid responsibility. The judge barely spared her a glance. Ms. Jennings, sit down. But, sit down. She collapsed back into her chair, face pale. Across the room, Bill, the smug HOA president who had been so sure he could force me into compliance, looked like he was about to be sick. He tugged at his collar, staring at the judge like a man watching his entire career burn to ashes. I leaned back, feeling the pure satisfaction of watching their little empire crumble. Mr. Carter, the judge continued, if you wish to proceed with a countersuit, I suggest you file immediately. Given Ms. Jennings' history, I'd say you have a strong case. Karen whipped toward me, her expression a mix of fury and fear. You wouldn't, she hissed under her breath. I smiled. Oh, I absolutely would. The pure hatred in her eyes could have melted steel. The judge banged his gavel. Case dismissed. Karen's downfall didn't happen overnight, but it happened fast. The moment I filed the countersuit, her entire world began collapsing. She was already facing criminal charges for filing a false police report, but now she was looking at a financial nightmare. And the best part? I wasn't the only one coming after her. News of the court case spread fast. Turns out I wasn't her first victim, just the first one to fight back and win. A few of my neighbors came forward with their own horror stories, all about Karen abusing her HOA power, faking violations, and even threatening people with liens on their homes just to make them comply. And then came the final blow. The HOA board, now scrambling to distance themselves from the mess, called for a special meeting. I wasn't invited, but I didn't have to be. Word got around quick. Karen was being voted out. It was unanimous. The same people she had bullied and terrorized for years turned against her, tossing her out of her precious throne of power. And when she stormed out of that meeting, humiliated and raging, that was almost better than seeing her hauled off in cuffs. Almost. I'd love to say she disappeared quietly after that she realized she had lost and slunk away in shame. But people like Karen don't know when to quit. Even after losing in court, getting kicked out of the HOA and facing criminal charges, she still tried one last desperate move. She filed a lawsuit against me for defamation. Apparently, I had tarnished her good name by spreading false accusations about her. I almost laughed when I got the notice. It didn't even make it past the first hearing. The judge threw it out immediately, calling it a blatant abuse of the legal system. And since Karen was already drowning in legal fees from her previous disasters, that was the final nail in the coffin. In the end, justice did what it does best. Caught up, Karen was forced to sell her home to cover the damages from my countersuit and her own growing legal costs. She went from the queen of the neighborhood to just another disgraced bully with nowhere to go. And me? I kept my home, my chickens, my gnomes, my bright purple house. And every single time I step onto my porch, cup of coffee in hand, staring at my perfect little slice of land free from HOA control, I think back to that moment when she slapped me. How she thought she could intimidate me. How she thought she could take what was mine. And I smile, because in the end, she lost.